Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. Today, working on this 2004 Jeep Wrangler Rubicon. It's got a head gasket leak, so we're going to go ahead and strip off the top end, take off this clutch fan, replace it with electric fan, and just try to seal up some of the leaks. It's got a throttle body spacer, which those are completely useless on a naturally aspirated vehicle. So we'll get rid of that and see if we can't get this vehicle's power back and improve on its performance. Also, some other upgrades that are coming, might be in a later video, is a snorkel and a catback exhaust. So that'll probably be another video, but you'll see this one a lot more on the channel. And we're gonna get started with just some general removal here. So I'm gonna take these bars off, these support bars, just so they won't be so much in the way. And I'm gonna get rid of this sweet intake. So take off these clamps and it'll probably fall off. So we're gonna start with that, and I will probably go ahead and drain the coolant from the petcock down there in the bottom. But let's get going. All right, so we removed those crossbars. Those are 13mm bolts. I'm letting the antifreeze, I'm depressurizing it a little bit at a time because it did come straight over here. But you can see the blow by that's happening on this intake, where it is sucking it up out of the breather because it's got the positive pressure coming out where the head gasket's been leaking. So now the next thing we'll do is just go ahead and push this out, pop this off, and get everything as cleared out as I can away from all these items here, because we got to move the majority of everything you see. But I have to replace this gasket too. So what I'm going to do is go ahead, take this off, and take this and start removing the fuel rail as this is cooling down. So let's go ahead and get started there, get it removed, and then tell you what it took. All right, big changes since I said what little bit we was going to do, but took the radiator off. So you have, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bolts to hold the radiator on right here. Those are 10mm. Then of course you had your 2 radiator hoses that just has the devil clamps on them. Then once you get those off and it's drained down, you can just work it out of there. But oh yeah, you do want to take, there's 4 bolts that hold the shroud on. They were 13mm. You take those off, you can pull it back, then take those 6 10mm off. Then you can push that back and push the shroud back, work the radiator up. Be careful not to smash the coils on it, and then you can get that up out there. The next thing I did, I pulled the fuel pump fuse for a relay and went ahead and started, depressurized the rail, pulled the clip off here. It just pops off, and you can pull the main line back. Raised up all these red clips. You can go right under it here with a small screwdriver. Give you a close up. Get in there, push that red clip up, then you can push down and pull these off. So I went all the way down through there, done that. Took the 10mm, took these 4 bolts off here, and then just pulled the fuel rail out. And then I went ahead and took the bolts off here so I could get this wiring harness up and out of the way in preparation of taking this intake off. So as far as the belt goes, I was just able to just put pressure on it and pull it off. So the tensioner looks to work different on this one. It doesn't have a spot that you can put a wrench on. So now here's the daunting task of getting this clutch fan off. So you have to basically support these bolts while knocking this big nut counterclockwise while holding these going clockwise. They make a spanner wrench that goes over this. Unfortunately, I don't have one this size, but I can make do with a 13mm and this 18-inch crescent. So we'll get that off. Once we get that off, I should be able to start getting this pump off, get this water outlet off, and start getting stuff out of the way to pull the valve cover and start pulling the manifolds and getting down to getting this head gasket replaced. All right, so as you can see, I got most of the accessories off the engine. You got 3 bolts holding the power steering pump, and I just kind of threw it to the side. So those are 13mm, and then it's 15mm for the alternator. So you got 2 that hold the alternator on. Once it comes off, you have the bracket, which was 14mm. Took that off. then the cool pack, which was also 13 millimeter, 4 of those. So I believe there's 4 of them. Yep. So took that off, and then I went down and took all the clips and holders off to be able to move that wiring harness in preparation of moving this. And then of course I took the 2 connectors off the alternator, and that was a 14 mil in the back of that alternator to get the power off. So right now, oh, and there's a little clip back here with a sensor. That was actually a 7/16 bolt. That little stud you see sticking out. So good old variation in sockets always makes the job nice. But at this point, I'm ready to start getting this valve cover off, and then I can get to the head bolts. All right, guys, big changes. Major headaches, but that's what I'm here to help you with. So we've ordered a back half of new exhaust that bolts to the catalytic converter right here. So we actually cut it to be able to get that section out because you couldn't work it around to where the muffler was. Our muffler was split on this, so that's why we ordered the catback section. But in order to get to the bolts up underneath here, you can see looking at the wrong one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Basically, those 4 bolts there, you really have to take those 2 15 millimeters off here. So these are 15 that hold it onto the exhaust pipes. Take those off, and then you can really see and get up underneath to these 14 millimeter bolts. These 2 right here, so there's a nut here and a bolt here, you can get from the top side. Right here, you can get from the top side with an extension, and then just a wrench here, but on the bottom, I had to get all those with a wrench because it was real tight around the intake and the exhaust. So once you get that, you just got to unhook the fuel lines that's being held onto the intake on the side, and then there's 3 vacuum lines. So I pulled, there's 1 10 millimeter bolt holding that wiring harness on the back. Then you can take that off and flip it over to the side out of your way. And then I went ahead and removed all the 10 millimeter bolts that hold the valve cover on. And this is where we're at. So we did also find out that this exhaust was actually for an early model 04 that someone had put on here. And you can see the drive shaft was actually slapping the exhaust when the suspension got a little weak or it hit a large bump and it sunk down, the drive shaft actually hit it. So you want to be careful if you got one of these Jeeps, because in 04 it looks like they split eared them. So earlier ones had this style, later ones had another one that collects down. So we've got that on order. You'll see it when it comes in. But right now we're just doing a lot of cleanup and getting stuff ready. So here's the valve cover. But right now I'm gonna go ahead and get all these head bolts cleaned up and get them wiped off in preparation of taking all those out and getting this head off there, so we can start cleaning it and getting the new gasket on, and then start this process in reverse. So let's get going. All right, guys, heads off. Just took the bolts out, kept them in order so I could reference with the other ones. You can see them there laying in the floor. But as you lift the head up, you pull your push rods out and make sure you keep them in order for where they came out of, because you want to make sure they get put back in where they made up to the lifter and the rocker. But as you can see, I got this cleaned up, cleaned as much of the carbon as I could off the top of the piston. We found our leak back there in the back on the head gasket. It was on the 6th cylinder. And upon observation of cleaning stuff up, we found that at some point someone has broke the ear off the end of the intake. So we now have to wait for a new one of those, but we're cleaning the head up here, getting it ready to install back on. So what we'll do is just keep buffing on this, get this surface nice and flat. We already took a straight edge across it. Looks real good. There's no warpage. This vehicle didn't get that, it didn't get hot. But we'll go ahead and we'll clean the dirt off these valves, because they've been sucking dirt for a little bit. This vehicle had been idling high and it was believed to have a vacuum leak. Well, it had a vacuum leak. All right, guys, so we got the head off. I went ahead and used the 1/2 inch, took these rocker arms off. So they're actually a torque spec rocker. So you just take them down to 19 foot-pounds. There's no lash adjustment on them. But I got two different methods how you can take the valve spring off. I've got this type here, which is sold at your local parts store. Just goes on, cranks down, works really good. And then you've got this one here, which presses it down and locks into place. I think only Napa really carries that, or you can order it on Jegs. So both of those remove the valve spring. So basically when you compress it down, you've got your little keepers right here that hold on to the end of the valve in these grooves. And then the valve stem seals is what we're here to replace. But right now, we're gonna go and do some valve lapping. So what we're gonna do on some valve lapping is, you'll see right here, some roughness to this surface. So your valve comes in contact with that surface, and that's what seals it off. So you can see that carbon build up on the valves. It's always a good practice for once you get in there to go ahead and just do a valve lapping job. So what you're gonna need is this little valve lapping tool. You can pick it up at any parts store, and some valve lapping compound. Now this mixes with water, and then once you get the mixture right, the paste, you can put it on here, and I'll show you what to do from there. So let me get this mixed. All right guys, so the first step with the valve grinding compound, I'm just going to apply it directly, which is roughly about 120 grit. And then I'm just going to put the tool on it. Most time when a valve is new, it'll suction to it, but in this case we got a little bit of crud on it. But it'll do enough to hold it in place, and then you're going to want to just work it back and forth. So it's hard for me to do it one hand, but basically that's what you're going to do. And you're going to keep doing this until you get a smooth surface where there's none of this pitting, as you can see, and then we'll back our way out all the way to where it gets around 500 grit, so we have a nice gloss surface. And we're going to do this to all the valves and replace the valve stem seals. So the next part, we'll show you the finished product of these two valves, and then we'll show you putting it back together, and then we'll complete the job off camera. All right, so we got our valve grinding done. As you can see, they cleaned up really nice. There's that, and of course I've got the exhaust side already in, so we're just going to slide that back in there. We got our new valve stem seals, so we're just going to press those up in there, and we're going to make sure they get seated on, and we'll go over here, work that one on, and seat it on. All right, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the keepers put back on. So let me grab all of that. All right, so I got the valve spring set back in. So you've got two keepers. See it necks down. So basically they're going to go on each side. One there, and make sure you get it pointed down. One here, and you can see the ribs will go inside the ribs of the valve stem. Sorry, it's hard to do with one hand. Assistant. And here it comes in. There we go. And just like that, you see how kind of set in down there. You want to, it's hard to hold the valve up and push it down, so you might have an extra set of hands, but you'll see how it came together right there. Now, I'm going to hold this as my assistant cranks this out and lets the pressure back up on the spring, which will seat the keepers back in the valve stem, as you can see happening right now. Keep cranking, and we're free. And there you go, it is installed back. Sometimes if this doesn't seat, there is another tool that I have that I brought with me that I'll probably show you maybe towards the end if we don't get any of them, or to double check. You'll put it down through there and you'll hammer, and basically it sits it flat. So while he still works on the valve lapping there, I'd went on and cleaned the valve cover up and replaced these little gaskets here. So they came in the head gasket kit. These just pop out, and there's the little gaskets that push in. So this is all cleaned up, the best it'll get, and only thing left to do is once we get it on, we're going to replace this with a filter, because the new Valon air intake doesn't use this PCV breather. But I went on to my next job of replacing the injector O-rings and found that he had replaced this rail at one point with one from the junkyard, and it actually came with a dent in it. So on this rebuild, we're gonna go ahead and replace the fuel rail with a new one. Plus it was looking a little crusty on the inside, so we don't want any of that transferring into the newer injectors that he did put in along with this rail. So we're just gonna replace it. And then I was cleaning the exhaust manifolds up in preparation to paint them, and found that we had a crack on number 6. So if you remember, we had a crack on number 6 intake runner, and now we have a crack on number 6 pipe. So I'm going to shoot and say that this at one point had probably cracked and started leaking, and maybe they try to torque it down to get the unevenness out of this pipe and crack this. But that is going to be countermeasured by a new set of headers that were just ordered. The new fuel rails ordered. The intake is sitting right there in that box. The first issue was this fan, but we got electric fans to replace it. So yeah, we're finding more and more as we go through. This exhaust piece that was taking hits from the yoke of the front drive shaft because it's off an earlier model Jeep before 04. It's new, it's sitting over there in a box. So yeah, this will basically be a brand new Jeep when we're done. But yeah, we're still in the process of it. So now I'm just gonna move on to continue cleaning stuff up while he gets those valves lapped. And then hopefully we'll actually get started back to putting it together. We are getting ready to, I'm going to wipe down the cylinders with some oil because they got washed down when we took the brake clean to it to clean it. I'm going to wipe those down. We got the new head gasket. We'll put it on there, set the head down, put the push rods in, and then basically I'll run all the bolts down finger tight. And then there's a specific sequence that goes for tightening these. And once I get the head on there and get the bolts down, I'll show you. It's actually a 3-step sequence. So you run 3 different torques. And then what's interesting on a Jeep is this last bolt right here. This is called number 11. It has a different torque than the rest of them. So your final torque is 110 foot-pounds. This bolt up here, number 11, is actually 100 foot-pounds. All right, so the valves are lapped. It got all cleaned up. Got all the grease off of it. Set it back down on there. I do recommend it. It's a 2-man job, especially if you didn't take the AC hoses off like we did. Like we didn't. But get that set down on there. And then you just go in your torque sequence. We went through, he had a Haynes manual. So there's an A, B, C, and D. So A was 22 foot-pounds, following it in the sequence. B was 45. C was a recheck at 45. And D was 110, except for bolt 11, like I stated before, which was 100. This is also the only bolt that gets locked tight. So those are torqued back on. And then I went ahead and pulled the rockers off, and we cleaned up the push rods, and then made sure they were seated in as we put some 10W30 on them. Made sure those were seated in, and then put the rockers and bolted them back down. So these are positive stop rockers, and they have a torque spec of 19 foot-pounds. So what I always do on my engine builds is I'll run them down and get a few foot-pounds of torque, and then turn the revolution and watch the valves actually work. And when they go all the way down on the low, I'll tighten them, and then do this 2 more times as it goes through the revolution. So, and we just put the bolt or a 3/4 ratchet on the crank and turned it over. The spark plugs are out right now, so it wouldn't build compression, and we wasn't fighting it. So we are going to put the spark plugs back in, and now we're going to put this valve cover back on. What is
the
sequence?
Yeah, tightening sequence. Started
Here. Yeah, so we can point out the sequence. So you start in the middle. So you're looking at like 1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
11.
There's 11, 12, 13, and 14. So
just spirals.
You just keep doing the spirals in that same pattern. Like I said, working through A, B, C, and D. So let's go ahead and get this valve cover back on, get the spark plugs in, and we're on our way back out. All right, guys, some more progress. So we jumped through, like I said, we put this valve cover on and torqued all those bolts down. And then I went ahead, put this sensor back in over here that was on the head. Went ahead and put the bracket back on that had your tensioner on it. It was those 4 bolts. And then the 2 bolts holding the alternator on. Put that back on. Put this pulley back on with its spacer. Cleaned it up and painted it. Went ahead and put this back in. Got those 2 bolts in for the water outlet. Hooked up the heater hoses. And then we just put on this gorgeous header. So this is a Rugged Ridge header. It was on their website for $484, but Amazon had it for $184. So same part number, same price, or sorry, same part number, same fitment, everything. So he found that for a steal, and it's beautiful. So now what we're going to do is we got the intake manifold. We got to clean it up a little bit more, put the sensors and the vacuum lines in it, and then we'll be able to put it on. There's a torque sequence that goes for this header and intake, so we'll follow that torque sequence. But before we throw that on, we'll go ahead and get those header plugs out and get the new O2 sensors in, because those will all but disappear when that intake's back on, because it covers up this entire area. All right, guys, so we got everything back together. Got the bolts back onto the throttle body, got it sealed down, got this Volant intake on. We'd like to do the rest of the snorkel, but Volant didn't supply all the hardware. A lot of things were missing. And we've got some other issues to figure out, like this brace won't go back on. So, I don't know, things we gotta figure out. But, got the fuel injectors, everything's buttoned up. Got the new fan in, we just have to wire it in, but it's in. You can see there's not a lot of clearance, but everything is back together. We just put the Y pipe on, so we're gonna fire it up here in a second after we check everything. And it's gonna be loud, but that's how we like it. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. We went through and finished out that intake, as you've seen in the previous picture, and we got this thing back on the road. So please subscribe, ask any questions, hit that follow button, and check me out on Instagram, Mustang Jackson 67. And until next time, let's keep building.